This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown.
Hi, hello, and welcome to a very special Friday evening edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown for December 27th, 2024. Happy championship week to everybody who is participating out there and maybe is going to win $1 million this year in either the FFPC Main Event or the FantasyPros Championship. I'm Eric Balkman. You know me from the Better Sports Network High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show, the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and, of course, the sponsor of this program, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, myffpc.com. We have a great show for you tonight. A lot of fun and a lot of knowledge will be dispensed and had by all. Before we get into it, I do want to remind you that signups are going on right now for the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. 2 of them this year. You can enter for $200 to win $500,000, or you can enter for $35 and still be eligible for a $100,000 grand prize. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. Just choose the 12 players you want and watch them ride throughout the playoffs. Again, only 1 player per team. And the big thing this year that you have to be aware of is, and I know a lot of people like to wait till the afternoon on wildcard weekend to get their teams and build their lineups. You cannot do that this year. The NFL has made that an impossibility because they are starting the playoffs on wildcard weekend at 1 p.m. Eastern time instead of the usual 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 3.5 hours that you will not have this year, which means you got to get your teams, your registrations in early and your team set by kickoff on January 11th. So myffpc.com is where to go for that. You can also register and play in the FFPC Weekly Challenge. There is no draft. There is no salary cap. Just choose the 10 or 12 players that you want and watch them ride through the weekend's games. Remember, 1 player per team, $35 to enter or $200 to enter. Win up to $2,500. 10, 30, and 100-team contests over at myffpc.com. Myffpc.com is where you can sign up for that. Now, I want to bring in our guest tonight, a guy who has been on this show before. I've done a few shows with him over the course of his high-stakes career. This is a guy that has now been playing high-stakes fantasy football for 2 decades. Only gets 1 main event entry per year. Now, keep that in mind when I tell you this. This is he's coming off his 9th FFPC Main Event League Championship. 9 out of 20. That's pretty good. That is a high batting average for sure. Out of the last 5 years, 4 times he has been in the championship round going for that $1 million grand prize. In 2020, he finished 29th overall. In 2021, he finished 9th overall. And then in 2022, he finished 8th overall. Lost in the semifinals last year, but he is back with a vengeance this year. He is in the championship round and hopefully can put together a great week 17 to get back up near the top of the leaderboard again. I'm, of course, talking about the incomparable Rob Linkowski, and he joins me right now. Rob, good evening. Welcome. How you doing tonight?
Doing awesome, Balky. Thank you, as always, for having me on the show. And again, as always, I thank you for all that you do for fantasy football so we can enjoy it. So I know in August, I probably watch your drafts every night and listen to you and all your guests to try and help me build the successful team. So thank you.
And it's been an incredible ride for you. I mean, I look at this, you were an OG in the WCOF days playing back then. This is incredible that you're getting 1 main event team every year. That's 20 teams. You have 9 of them win the league that you're in. One would say, Rob, why aren't you doing more teams because of the success that you've had? Or is it because you only have one team, you baby that team and finesse every little thing about it, squeeze every last fantasy drop of goodness out of it. Is that the secret to your success?
I think it's a little of both. Like I give total credit to those guys that own 20, 50, 100 teams. I don't know how they do it, obviously. I give them so much credit because one's hard enough, but I've always kind of just been that guy. Hey, if I believe that, Jaden Daniels is my quarterback, I go with it because you end up kind of rooting against your players every week with multiple teams. So, yeah.
That is true. I've been dealing with that. I was just talking with somebody the other day. I was rooting for I can't remember who it was. But it might have been Kelsey on Christmas Day. And I was rooting for him because I knew I needed him in a big league that I'm in. And I was really happy when I saw, him making plays and ends up having a great week. And then I was looking at some of the other scores from my other leagues where I'm playing for championships, and I was going against him in 2 other leagues, Right. So it's like, it's tough because I know who I have and I tend to cheer for him. But yeah, when you're, rolling with multiple teams, chances are that guy you're rooting for here, that might be screwing you over. He might be screwing you over in another league, which I guess you don't have to worry about that. And that's kind of nice.
And, I always, you kind of have a group of players that you like at a certain draft spot. And I kind of just go with the guys that I kind of like that I want to root for, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm. Has your draft strategy, the way you've approached drafts, changed over the last 20 years?
Balky, the way I'll put it is, I think if I had to guess, I was kind of ahead of the curve about 7-8 years ago. I was always wide receiver heavy, right? Mm-hmm. But I kind of saw a shift this year, and I think you'll agree, with a lot of teams now playing 2 deep safeties. I think the running back's kind of coming back over the wide receiver this year.
I would agree with that. And one of the things I've noticed that's been very frustrating for me as a guy who I love hero running back in my teams where I'm getting that stud guy in the first 2 rounds and I'm building a bunch of receivers around him. And then, in order for that strategy to work, you got to hit on these backup running backs that need the opportunity. And I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot of opportunities this year. I have a lot of guys that by and large have been languishing on my bench all year because the guy in front of them never got hurt or never missed significant time. And that's really affected me. What I think is going to be interesting next year is how do FFPC players attack this in their drafts? How does the NFL attack this in the NFL draft? Because this is a pretty good running back class coming up. Yep. I wonder if those players end up getting bumped up because you do need more talent at the running back position because that it seems to be like we're ebbing and flowing, and now we're flowing back to where running backs really matter, and you need a good one to be successful. Rob, I'm looking forward to that. I'm already looking forward to 2025, but that's one of the things I think that's at the forefront of my mind.
The last time I was on your show, you asked me, like when I had my couple years in a row, what was the common denominator? And I said it then, and it kind of held true again this year. I've always kind of hit the tight end in like the 5th, 6th, 7th round. And I'll go back. You just listed the years. 2020, I hit Waller like in the 5th round. 2021, Hawkinson in the 6th. And one year I got Andrews in the 5th. Again, this year, I hit David Njoku in the 6th, who, when he was healthy, boy, he was getting a lot of targets and really helped me. Yeah.
I think for me, I'm playing primarily in the KFFSC, which is not tight end premium, but I still like to get one of those top 5 tight ends. And I think it's kind of a cheat code. But this year, you think about all the whiffs, and Kelsey's been mostly missed. He has hit certain weeks, but it's been mostly missed. Andrews has been mostly missed. Kyle Pitts, who else? Hawkinson, Laporta. Hawkinson, I guess I won't count him because he was drafted super low because of the injury. But Laporta for sure. The only guy that's really come through has been the only guy who hasn't caught a touchdown all year, and that's been Trey McBride. McBride has come through. But to your point, you wait on the position. David Njoku, Brock Bowers, Tucker Kraft, all these guys that have come up. Will Dissly had about a month where he worked out. So I think I might have to adopt that strategy next year where I'm going to wait till maybe the top 6 or 7 tight ends are off the board. And then maybe I'll go grab one, and then I'll grab like the 13th one off the board or the 14th one. And hopefully one of those 2 hits, because it always seems like, to your point, one of these guys comes from out of nowhere every year and ends up having a boffo season.
And when you go through the matchup, the weeks 1 through 12, basically the difference between the tight end in years past, if you had Gronk or Kelsey, you might lose the tight end matchup like 30-10. This year, there wasn't that big separation, so you weren't like losing, the tight end battle every week. And in your case, like I got Njoku at 6'6". I really wanted Brock Bowers, but he literally went 1 or 2 picks right before me. So he was kind of, him and Njoku was my line in the sand, So I was fortunate enough to get Njoku. So
we have so much to discuss on this show tonight. Rob and I are going to get to Marvin Harrison. We're going to talk about Thielen. We're going to talk about Jared Goff and so much more. I want to lead things off here. And some of these questions that they have changed a little bit. Because we got some more news since I sent this to you, but we're gonna roll with it. Christian Watson is listed as questionable for that Vikings-Packers game on Sunday. If he is active, how big of a week is he in for, Rob? Because he has been coming on lately over the last 4 or 5 weeks, getting more and more involved in the offense, still making the big plays, which is what we're looking for. And if you're looking for a guy, maybe you're trying to move up higher on that FFPC main event leaderboard, which I know you are, Watson would be a guy that could have this. You think about the 3 touchdown game he had against Dallas. He has the ability to do it. Is this going to be one of those weeks if he's able to go?
Yeah, Green Bay's so hard to determine because they got so many guys out there. I remember in the regular season, their coach said we have basically 4 number ones. So Watson to me is a 20-point to a 2-point kind of guy. Very rarely is he in the middle there, but you just don't know who it's going to be every week. But obviously, if you own Christian Watson, I think you're playing him this week just because of the upside there, And at this point, what's your other option, to be quite honest,
I think, and you might, and this, like, anytime I ask these questions for all the viewers watching, like, it always depends on who else you have on your team. And maybe you have somebody and maybe you don't. I think about CeeDee Lamb, how he gets shut down, and I'm scrambling in one of my leagues to try to figure out what I'm doing at receiver there because I don't have a great option right now. Christian Watson, he's not the most attractive play in the world this week, especially when you consider the injury. But at the same time, non-attractive plays sometimes can make all the difference in the world when you are trying to finish near the top of the heap. So you might have to do that this week. I know, Rob, you're probably going to do it, and we'll see what the other FFPC main event and FantasyPros championship round players do. The total on that game is 48.5 between the Packers and Vikings. So there could be some fantasy goodness there for Christian Watson. Yeah. The latest that we have, and I honestly, I don't feel great about this right now. And this is another league. I don't know what I'm going to do here because there's not a whole lot of quarterbacks out there. But Anthony Richardson has not practiced this week because of a back injury and a foot injury. Shane Steichen, according to Mike Chappell, who covers the Colts, said, we'll see how the next 48 hours go when he was asked about Richardson's availability. Flacco has been working with the starters this week. He would be the guy that would step up. I honestly don't know if Richardson's going to go. For the sake of this question, the purpose of this question, well, let's make it a twofold question. What kind of output are you expecting if Richardson goes from him? And if he can't go, what kind of a week should fantasy owners expect from Joe Flacco?
So you're kind of hitting right to the core here, and I'm going to kind of twofold answer this with another guy that we were going to talk about. So when I drafted my team this year, I waited on quarterback longer than I ever did, right? And I think I went with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert in the 13th and 14th round. By week 3 or 4, I knew I cannot win my league with those 2 quarterbacks. Luckily enough, a team in our league owned Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield, and Jared Goff, and he cut Jared Goff.
Wow.
So I immediately jumped on him. And, Goff's had some bad games because they love to run Montgomery and Gibbs. But as you know, in the 2-week $1 million bracket, he's gone 46 and 28. So, and then someone then cut Anthony Richardson. So I basically picked up Goff and Richardson, and so many times I was going back and forth who to go with. And to be honest with you, like, Goff is just a steady play there. Richardson scares me because as a pure passer, I don't know if he's all there. Obviously, his legs save him in the fantasy world. So, but again, the Giants is a plus matchup. So I wouldn't feel bad if you had to play Richardson if he plays. But Flacco, we've seen with Flacco, Winston, Andy Dalton, those guys can still produce,
Yeah.
So, but, and I wouldn't be here today without Jared Goff because I was going nowhere, openly admitting with Herbert and Lawrence.
Regarding Richardson versus Flacco,
Yeah.
if Richardson can't go, how strong of a start would Flacco be? Would he be like a top 15 guy? Or
I'd say top 15, not 15? Top 10, but yeah, top 15. Yeah.
Okay.
Which, he did really well last year too. Yeah. And this year.
He really came through down the stretch for a lot of fantasy owners. I think the thing to keep in mind here is number one, the matchup that you talked about. And number two, whether Richardson or Flacco goes, I think you can feel okay starting either one of those guys, even Richardson being banged up. The thing that Richardson, he does two things really well. The deep ball is really a plus move for him. And then his legs. If he could just figure out that intermediate thing, Rob,
right.
you really have something here with Anthony Richardson.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about this. Marvin Harrison was a player that was drafted second round, third round in a lot of FFPC leagues. All the hype in the world. Obviously, he had the bloodlines, the pedigree, had a great collegiate career at Ohio State. For whatever reason, it never really got going. He had a few plus games this year, but it never really got consistently going. Now he goes to the Rams this week to play them. And I think people who did survive with Harrison as their second or third round pick that are still making important decisions this weekend. Congratulations to you. But what do you do? Because he really hasn't been carrying your team. Is Harrison a guy that we should seriously think about benching this week because of the lackluster production and the fact that the Cardinals aren't playing for anything anymore because they're eliminated from the playoffs?
Okay, again, it's like you read my team. I was one of those that drafted Marvin Harrison in the second round. And when you asked me, what's your best pick and worst pick, he would probably have to be my most disappointing. And I kind of broke a rule that I follow. When you're drafting Marvin Harrison at 2-6, you're basically saying he's going to have one of the best rookie seasons ever, right? But if I went back to my draft, though, Balky, there was nothing there that really, like Nakua was there, Kupp was there, who obviously got hurt, Devontae Adams, who until now. So I didn't feel like I really lost much by drafting Harrison. I do believe, though, one of Harrison's better games were against the Rams where he had those two big touchdowns. He had a 29-point, maybe week 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. My guess is, again, I got to play him this week. What I'm hoping for, I did hear Kyler Murray say, hey, we got to get on the right page, Marvin and I. Maybe because they're out of the playoffs, they have nothing to lose and they force him the ball. But he's been very aggravating the last 4 to 5 weeks, just getting 3-4 catches a game.
He got that probably was his best week of the season. It was against the Rams. It was week 2, 4 catches for 130 yards and 2 scores in that game. What's interesting about the rest of his season, Rob, he only had 1 game with more than 5 catches this year. He had 6 catches against Miami. Otherwise, it's been 4, it's been 5, it's been 3, 2. He had 0 against the Packers, although I want to say he got hurt in that game. I thought he got a concussion in that game. And
he did. And I'll tell you, my son, who he also owned Marvin Harrison this year, he won a 350 league, his first championship ever. So we're
with Harrison?
Yep, with Harrison. And let's say when we would watch the game and Harrison's on the right, when Murray would throw it to the right, we're like, maybe that's Marvin. And it seemed like he just cleared it out for McBride coming underneath. So he was aggravating to watch, but I'm hoping this week that, they kind of force him the ball for that reason. So
where would you be comfortable taking him in 2025? Would you take him as a top 20 receiver?
I mean, I think you still have to. Yeah. I mean, not many people come in first year and have immediate success. So I would say he's still second, third round next year. Yes.
So I want to talk about a game, and this is, I realized this after I sent this to you. I'm like, by the time Rob and I are doing the show, the Seahawks and Bears would have already played. But let's talk about Smith and Jigba and DK Metcalf. Quite frankly, it was a really weird game last night. I don't necessarily want to take, have any takeaways from that game. But what we have seen this season, the big step forward that Smith and Jigba has taken, and DK Metcalf clearly being the second receiver here. When you look at those guys next year, look into your Linkowski crystal ball. You think Smith and Jigba is going to be overdrafted and Metcalf is actually going to be a value next year? How do you see that Seattle pass catching duo shaping up next
Yeah.
year.
I mean, I think Smith and Jigba, he's a second round pick. And Metcalf, I mean, heck, he went fourth round this year. He could be fifth or sixth. I kind of feel bad for him. You could see some of his body language. He knows he's not getting the ball. So I think they're going to invert, where their draft spots were.
What did, I don't know if these things go hand in hand or not. What did we miss on Marvin Harrison that we drafted him as high as we did? Because I'll raise my hand. I drafted him in a couple of leagues that high too. What do we miss on him? And then the fact that Jackson Smith and Jigba has been one of the best receivers all year. What do we miss on him, letting him slip so far? Do we need to change the way we look at receivers when we're drafting and situations when we're drafting our teams in the summer?
Yeah, I think, this is Smith and Jigba's second year, because last year I owned him, picked him up on waivers, and he was just coming on a little bit at the end. I think the mistake I made with Marvin Harrison was, like, when DeAndre Hopkins got to Arizona, Kyler Murray forced the ball to him. So I kind of thought that would be the same for Marvin Harrison being the number one. But obviously you're dealing with a different coach, Kingsbury to the new guy. So I think I think you just got to be careful, rookie wide receivers.
Yeah. Yeah, and much in the same way, we saw Smith and Jigba take this big step forward. Maybe we see that with Harrison.
That's right.
Year,
Absolutely.
Non-zero chance of that. David Njoku has been ruled out. So we know we're not playing him this week against the Dolphins. What's your kind of take on just the Browns skill position players in general in that game, knowing that it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback, as long as he's healthy enough to play? But we know there's no Cedric Tillman again. We know there's no David Njoku. You're looking at Elijah Moore. You're looking at Jerry Jeudy. What kind of expectations should championship owners have for those two, specifically those two receivers in this Browns offense with DTR tossing on the rock?
I got to think Jerry Jeudy won a lot of people their league playoffs, because, I mean, he had a 3-week run, which was incredible with Jameis Winston. I think Jerry Jeudy takes a major step back with DTR in there. Mm-hmm. I actually thought it was okay, and it did play through. The Njoku was getting 17, 13 targets a week with Winston. But when you got a quarterback like DTR, I think a lot of times that tight end's the safety valve. So I wasn't too concerned going to the Njoku, but certainly those guys on the outside like Jeudy and Elijah Moore, I'd be concerned you're not going to get the production you would hope for if Winston was there.
I'm just seeing this now. Cleveland.com reported that Ken Dorsey said DTR is officially going to start. This game against the Dolphins. He actually had a calf injury that he played through. It got hurt early in that game last week in that loss to the Bengals, but he's going to be out there. And selfishly as a fantasy owner, I'd much rather see Jameis Winston slinging the rock all over the place. We talked about how the game has changed this year because of all this cover too. Jameis Winston doesn't care. Nope. He's going to toss it downfield. He's going to try to fit it in those tiniest windows as he can. It's been kind of a throwback watching him play, but we're going to watch DTR play against the Dolphins this week. Adam Thielen was added to the injury report for the Carolina Panthers on Thursday, I want to say. Maybe it was Wednesday. But he got taken off today. So he does not have an injury designation. He is going to be playing against Tampa this week. This is a guy who has gotten 34 targets in his last 4 games. He's caught 27 of them, just under 300 yards, and he's gotten in the end zone twice. As far as where he has finished among receivers in PPR leagues, top 24 in 3 of his last 4 games. Maybe not the biggest ceiling in the world, but definitely a high floor here. How do you feel about continuing to lock in Adam Thielen into your lineup in Week 17 against Tampa?
100% confident. I'll tell you, that guy just keeps going, and I know he had a good game against Tampa the first time I watched that game. Bryce Young's kind of bounced back here. Luckily he got his job back when Dalton was in that injury, but Adam Thielen at age 34, keep going. I'd start him with total confidence. I
wonder. I'm going to look it up right now. I'm kind of curious about his contract and what he's looking at for next year. He is under contract with Carolina for 2025. There is a void year potentially in 2026. But just looking ahead to next year, this is a guy that I think is going to be undervalued again. I can't imagine Carolina going heavy on grabbing another receiver.
Right.
since they just drafted Xavier Legette in the
Yep.
first or second round this year. I can't remember. Second round, I think.
Yep.
They have Jatavian Sanders. They have Jonathan Brooks, who maybe isn't playing next year. But Chuba Hubbard, they just inked to this big deal. So there are some playmakers in that Carolina offense. But Adam Thielen doesn't really get the proverbial juices going for a lot of people. He's going to be undervalued again next year. I think Adam Thielen is a guy that you can get easily as your wide receiver 5, maybe even as a wide receiver 4 next year. He's just going to continue to do numbers. I like what he has going with Bryce Young here. So I'm starting him in week 17. Yep. And I'm kind of excited about drafting him next year too, Rob.
He's not sexy, but he gets the job done as like a number 4, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We talked about Jared Goff earlier, and I want to bring this conundrum up to you because I know this is something that some fantasy owners are facing here with everything on the line, $1 million on the line. If you have the opportunity this week to start Jared Goff at the Big Denim in Santa Clara against the Niners, would you do so over Jordan Love, who is going on the road to take on the Brian Flores-led Minnesota Vikings defense? Who is the better start here this weekend between Goff and Love?
I would probably go Love, just because, I think it's going to be more of a shootout, but and quite honestly, obviously, Goff's had 2 great weeks, but there's been some weeks where Goff's only had 12 to 14 points. Now, I think Montgomery's injury helps Goff a little bit because now you just have Gibbs. And I don't think Gibbs is a 30, carries a guy. So I think they're going to throw it more. But I think there's the sky's the limit for Jordan Love. I think he's actually underperformed this year. I think he's got the weapons and everything, and Minnesota's going to score. If I had both, I'd probably go Love, but I'm fine starting Jared Goff, obviously, too.
I think part of the reason too, with Jordan Love underperforming right now, and I happen to, as weird as it is, to say that, I think I happen to agree with you, and it's not really Jordan Love's fault. Love has been the beneficiary. Well, number one, first part of the season when he was throwing all those interceptions, he was hurt. That knee was really bad. He just did not have the confidence, and now he got that back, and he's hardly turned the ball over at all in the last 2/3 of the season. Yeah. But that ground game for Green Bay has been so good this year with Josh Jacobs and the offensive line. Love hasn't needed to do a whole lot. You think about some of these games that the Packers have been in. I think about that Thursday game against Detroit where they lose 34-31. You'd think that was a shootout. I think Love threw the ball 20 times that game. Because he didn't have to, because Jacobs was moving the ball so well. He has been extraordinarily efficient in the second half of the season. Because things have opened up via the pass because of the threat of Josh Jacobs running the football. So because Green Bay's been so efficient with the ground game, I think it kind of negatively affects Love as far as his fantasy statistics go. Matt LaFleur says he's been playing the best ball of his career so far, and I totally get that. We just wish it was better for Love's fantasy output.
This too, Bulky. It's total game flow. For example, when Goff had his 48, he's down 21-0 to Buffalo. You're licking your chops. They can't get any better than that. So it's all game flow. How it determines.
So when you look back in week 16 this past week, Rob, which I know it's weird because we're 3 games deep into week 17 already because of the Christmas Day games. But when you look back at week 16, was there anything? I mean, are there surprises anymore this deep into the season? I always say that as the season goes on, fantasy becomes a little bit more unpredictable because of injuries. You're having third stringers step in, and that affects guys in different ways. And it's just really difficult to get a handle on it. Was there anything that stood out to you in week 16 that kind of caught you off guard?
Well, I would say the 2 things, if I had to look at the leaderboard, why people are up there right now, it's got to be because of Jonathan Taylor's week 16 and Devontae Adams is week 15. Those are Devontae Adams wasn't doing anything all year and explodes for 40-some points. And then Jonathan Taylor last week, that was the Jonathan Taylor from 2-3 years ago. Right. So I think those 2 performances single-handedly are going to win people some money.
What are you doing with Taylor in drafts next year?
I think he's still second round, I do, and keep in mind, Richardson's taken a lot of touchdowns away from him.
Yes, he has. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always, one of the things that I that has prevented me from drafting Jonathan Taylor the last couple of years, I don't typically like drafting running backs early
Yeah.
that have good mobile quarterbacks, because those mobile quarterbacks not only are able to take away scores inside the 5, but they don't usually dump off to the running backs. They'll just take off and run with it. But Taylor, I mean, for what it's worth, he's been great here. And second round, I think, seems pretty appropriate right now too. Tom's. Go ahead.
My guess is, like fantasy MVPs, you got to say Barkley, Henry, and probably Jamar Chase. Those are the 3 guys that, won people their leagues.
And I would say in FFPC leagues, because of the tight end premium aspect and the fact that this dude was like the 8th or 9th tight end drafted, Brock Bowers.
Yeah, Brock Bowers.
Bowers is, and I've been asking a lot of people this, Rob, and I don't know how where you stand in on this. No matter the quarterback, he's been great. No matter how bad the offense has been, Brock Bowers has been great this year. And I think, like, since it can only get better, do we have to have Brock Bowers in the conversation for the 101 next year?
I mean, I don't know, first round for sure, because I was very familiar with Brock Bowers. I had 2 kids that went to the University of Georgia. So I knew he was a generational talent, and I was watching your drafts, and I thought I could get him at 6. And right when I was at 5'8", I'm like, should I take him? And then he didn't last to the 6. So I knew Bowers was going to be special,
Yeah. And it's, to me, it's kind of weird that his ADP was so far depressed. I mean, I know he was a rookie and I know he's a tight end, but knowing, like, and we heard plenty of people that say, Bowers is going to be unbelievable. And he was. And I feel like he's been dealt one of the worst situations that you can have as a rookie. And he's excelled. He hasn't survived. He's excelled, which has been great. For sure. Okay, so Bowers in the first round with you next year. I get that, and I'm totally with you. Speaking of league winners and teams or players that are really carrying their teams this year, Tom Smith chimes in the YouTube chat. Chuba Hubbard and James Conner. Conner is, and I'll bring up him first. He's a guy I never really target in drafts because it just always seems like he's hurt and he's getting older. And then they invested the draft capital in Trey Benson. So I missed the boat. I have Conner on like 1 dynasty team, maybe 2 dynasty teams. That's it. Like I did not have him this year. He's been great. And then Hubbard, obviously, and the Panthers are pretty prescient in that contract that they inked into. The following week, Jonathan Brooks re-tears that ACL, and I don't know what his future is going to be like. Let's talk about Conner first here. I think this is a guy that next year, because they signed him to a contract extension as well. Next year, I'm going to have to look long and hard at this guy, understanding that Arizona should take another step forward on offense. And maybe I've just been unfairly penalizing this guy because I think he might get hurt, ignoring the fact that when he's healthy, he runs hard, he runs well, and he puts up numbers.
There's another guy, not sexy, I've never owned James Conner ever. And I don't know why, just doesn't appeal to me, but man, does he get the job done. I mean, this guy is him and Hubbard. And then I was kind of on Brooks. I thought Brooks was going to be that guy that you could plug in week 6, 7 and could win your leagues. But Chuba Hubbard's held him off. But both those guys are, James Conner last week, again, huge game. So they got to move up the draft spot next year.
Hubbard is a guy too that has been one of the best running backs in the league so far this year. And Brooks is not going to threaten him at all in 2025. I can't imagine that he would. So yeah, Hubbard and Conner are going to be 2 guys. Now here's the other thing, Robin, we have seen this happen before where we draft based on last year's stats. And sometimes that gets us into trouble too. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
And Conner, and maybe next year, Conner's the type of guy where he separates his shoulder and he misses a month and a half or something like that. Or Hubbard strains a hamstring and he misses a month. So you never know these things, but I think that we kind of, just fantasy players in general unfairly penalize both those guys this year. Let's get back to something that you had kind of talked about earlier. And maybe we'll get into some other players here. But when you look back at all your drafts that you have done in 2024, who's the one guy that you were, maybe it was Bowers, where you were this close to drafting a bunch more shares of a certain guy, but you didn't. And then the one guy that you wish that you wouldn't have drafted at all, the guy that you drafted in a lot of spots, but it really never paid off.
The guy that aggravated me the most, we touched on him, was Marvin Harrison, in the second round. In the third round, I took Jalen Waddle, and I'm not really upset with myself because that's just bad luck. Tua's injury really took care of him and Tyreek Hill, The guy that I really kind of went for, and I got to thank my son Mark for this, he told me he said, Dad, you're going to want Terry McLaurin this year.
Yeah.
And, I think his career high was 5 touchdowns. He's now up to 12. And honestly, Balky, the one thing I'm going to say about our league this year, I'm going to give it props. I don't know if I've ever recalled this. We had 6 teams this year that were just dynamite. And that FFPC, a 150 week is a good week that should get you a win. So I would put up 165 and I'm like, oh, I'm gaining ground. And all these other 5 teams are right there with you, right? Okay. And truly, I mean this as being humble. I am not in the playoffs without Terry McLaurin's 86-yard touchdown with 21 seconds left, week 12 against Dallas. I mean, I'm out, and I feel bad for the teams that got knocked out because of it. I even left the room, and my son yelled, "Oh, my God, Dad, McLaurin." And I said, what? Never thinking it. So he's been great. That was a total luck play. But as I mentioned to you earlier, I made my playoffs by 4.9 points. That last Monday night game, San Diego, Baltimore, I had all the permutations down how I had to get in. I snuck in. And then I had 2 weeks of like 185 and 208 in the divisional round, which I would have loved to keep for the $1 million bracket. But McLaurin's was my savior, that and in so many other ways. Yes.
I think that especially in a year where fantasy scoring is down, again, because of the cover 2, you're seeing smaller NFL scores, which in turn has been smaller fantasy scores. I remember back, 15 years ago, where you're basically, if you average 155 points a game, you're going to be in the playoffs in your league. And then 155, 5-10 years ago, all of a sudden it's like, that's not enough because there's an explosion of scoring. And now I feel like 155 is doing it again, or at least should, except for your league where you had a really competitive top half of the league where only 4 teams make the playoffs. And then you ended up sneaking in. That was what week that McLaurin caught that against the Cowboys?
Week 12, last week.
12, last week. Okay.
And you know how when you're watching during the day, like it's 2 o'clock, not going well, 3 o'clock, 3:30, start getting some points, and then that was just luck. And the other thing I'll say, Balky, I always say this, regardless of your draft, it's always going to come down to your free agents and who you start and sit. And I'll give you another thing. FFPC changed this year that their defensive scoring. Yeah. And I remember my other son saying that's going to make a difference. And I picked up Denver Broncos defense in like the 3rd week. And I mean, they were getting like 20 points a week, which is huge for a defense, and I remember you were saying about Jameis Winston. Heck, the one time Winston put up over 45 points, but had 2 pick sixes and I had Denver. So, but it was, I think the defense was a difference this year too.
How do you handle defenses when you're not necessarily drafting, but when you're managing your teams throughout the season? Are you looking for one that you can just start every week? Or are you trying to stream when you can? And was it different for you this year and how you manage that based on that?
I was always the one thing that never, someone once taught me this, sacks are consistent, turnovers come and go, right? Mm-hmm. So if you got a team that gets after the quarterback, and I actually picked up Denver and the Chargers, and I would play the matchups both ways, whatever it could be. Like I'd go Denver 4 weeks in a row. Then when the Chargers had plus matchups, I would just rotate those 2 pretty much.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
And at my draft, I swung and missed. I think I drafted the Bengals, for God's sake.
Oh, yeah. The Bengals were I picked them up. Oh, God. Who did they play? I think it was the Cleveland game.
Cleveland, week 1.
Yeah. No,
I'm sorry. New England. New England.
Right. Yeah. But I'm saying I picked him up recently, and I did draft the Bengals in a few leagues because of that New England matchup in week 1. But I picked him up again recently. I think it was Cleveland that was the one to exploit. And now I'm cutting them everywhere. But it was like the bookends of the season was the Cincinnati Bengals defense.
And the other thing I'd like to give prop to is obviously we all know Chad Schroeder, who has multiple teams, right?
Yeah.
He was in my league, drafted right next to me. And Balky, like every time I was on the guy, he took him right before me, like Saquon Barkley in the 2nd round, he grabbed right before me, like Kamara. So, we had some good players in our league, and it was a really competitive league this year. So,
Tom Smith also chiming in. I wish I didn't draft Pittman as much or at all for that matter. Are things going to get better for Michael Pittman in 2025 in Indy, Rob?
Boy, like Pittman was so good with Flacco, and then just I don't know, because like you said with Richardson, the deep ball's there. It seems like it goes to Pierce and Downs, and Pittman's the underneath guy where I agree with you, he struggles.
Pittman this year, excuse me. Now I will say this: since the bye, actually not since the bye, since week 10 when he missed due to injury, he has had at least 5 catches in 4 out of his last 5 games. He's top 40 plus receiving yards in 4 out of his last 5 games. Before that, though, the 4 weeks before that, excuse me, 3 for 35, 3 for 63, 1 for 16, and 1 for 14. So he's a guy who has been more missed than hit this year.
Yeah.
And when you look at what that team could look like next year, I think Pittman's kind of like a wild card. You draft him as your number 4 receiver. I wouldn't go higher than that. And see what happens. But good luck trying to know when to start him.
And Bulky, I got to bring this guy up. The mystery of all fantasy football, and I mean, you talk to so many other people than I do. Kyle Pitts. I just can't explain that. I don't understand it.
There were people his rookie season that were sold on him that said kind of in the same way about Bowers, right?
Yes.
Except the difference was Pitts was like a 3rd round pick his rookie year, and Bowers was going, 4 rounds later than that, 5 rounds later than that, whatever it was. And he has all the athleticism in the world. He should be a matchup nightmare. He has had a few games where it's like this is what he should be doing every week. And for whatever reason, he just can't put it all together consistently. And I think, and I've never was the first guy to bury him. Like there are plenty of people burying him before he even stepped on an NFL field. I keep giving him the benefit of the doubt. And now I'm just kind of like, you know what? This is who he is. He's going to have 1 or 2 really good games every year, but most of the time after that, he's going to be decent or bad.
Well, and Cousins loves the tight end typically,
Yeah, and that's another thing too. I mean, everything should have been unlocked this year. You didn't have Arthur Smith playing Jonnu Smith out there all the time and having everything funnel to him. So I guess I'm kind of just done making excuses for the guy. And I understand that if I want some upside at the tight end position, if Pitts slips to like the 12th or 13th one off the board, then I mean, sure, I'll take him. But I'm done taking him in the top 5 or top 6. It's just not worth it anymore.
Now, I'll ask you this. I'll turn the tables here and ask the question. Like, how I said I see kind of the running back coming in for a receiver. Do you see any other trend happening fantasy football the years coming?
That is a good question. I think kind of what we were talking about with the tight end position. I think tight ends are going to slip next year because nobody's going to want to, draft those early tight. Well, two reasons for that. The guys who waited on tight end that were paid off with the Bowers, the Tucker Crafts, the Jonnu Smiths of the world, they're not going to go early tight end next year. Right. And the people who went early tight end this year that were disappointed with Kelsey and Laporta and all these other guys, they'll wait. So I think you're going to see, I think tight end slip, even in a tight end premium format. I think a good number of them slip further next year. I think the what you brought up with the running back thing, I think that's going to be fascinating. I also would not be surprised if, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I would not be surprised if people are going to stay away from, starting their draft off with like 4 straight number 1 receivers, right?
Yeah.
I have not seen that work out as I've seen it work out this year. I have not seen it work out as much in years as it has in years past. And part of that I think is number 1 receivers, unless you are a true dominant alpha, they're kind of, they look at the Packers, right? They have a lot of really good guys that they don't really have to scheme open. Jordan Love just hits the open guy there. We saw it with San Francisco this year too. I mean, with Juwan Jennings and Deebo Samuel taking a back seat before Ayuk got hurt. So I wonder if that's going to happen too, where people are going to be a little bit more distrustful of those receivers, not necessarily in the first 2 rounds, but round 4, round 5. I don't know. So that could happen as well. But I think the biggest thing is the one you brought up with the running backs, the return of the running back, which could happen in 2025. I think that's what I'm most focused on.
If you had to say, like, go into next year, who would be the 101, 102, 103 in your opinion?
Yeah, I think as much as I was excited to say Bowers should be up there, I think I'm with you. He's a first-round pick. I don't know if people are going to be drafting him with the top overall pick. I think some people will. There will be drafts where he is the 101. But I think Chase is right up there. We'll have to be paying attention to what happens with his contract. But if Joe Burrow is serious about keeping the band together with Higgins and Chase there, and look what they've done this year, the Bengals defense played a role in that too. So here's hoping that the Bengals miss on their defensive draft picks this coming year too, so we can have another huge year. But I mean, Chase, to me, like what I saw from him, it was so easy for him. Burrow and him have been playing together for forever, so there's a connection there. It's hard for me to say, he's not going to be the 101. I think Barkley is probably going to be 102, 103. I hate drafting a running back that high based on what he has done the previous year. And bear in mind, I think he's like 100 some yards away from 2,000. He would be the second oldest running back ever to get 2,000 yards. And to me, it's like, well, he's gonna be 28 next year. Do I really want to? I was a guy who got bit by McCaffrey in like 3 or 4 leagues this year. I don't want to replay of that, Rob. Like, I don't want to be dealing with that again. But he's probably going to go, top 2 or 3, and then I think when you get into the the Justin Jeffersons of the world, how do you balance that out with the Steady Eddie, Puka Nacua, and Amon-Ra St. Brown? I mean, they're going to have a say in being a top pick. Bijan Robinson is going to be right up there. I don't know about Breece Hall, but Bijan Robinson is going to be right up there again. And Theo Greminger was talking about this, just real quick, not to interrupt you. Theo Greminger was talking about this on the School of Scott Fantasy Points podcast. He thought that Jahmyr Gibbs was going to be drafted super high because people are going to remember the ride that Gibbs took them on in the championship round, and because we have short memories, because we are affected by recency bias, we're going to forget that Montgomery was hurt, and people are going to take Gibbs up there. So Gibbs is probably another guy that we'd be looking at as well. I don't know if I'd take him in the top 3, but I understand the argument.
I had Gibbs last year, loved him. Last year I took Chase 101. This year I got him 108. And I'll tell you what, nobody's more dangerous when he gets that ball in his hands. Like when Burrow climbs that pocket, your ears go up because you're saying, if Chase gets this, he's won me weeks, and we're actually hoping for a big week 17 out of him. So,
we had Tom Smith chiming in. He says Chase, Barkley, then Lamb, or he said St. Brown at 3 instead of Lamb. And then Bill Hollywood saying Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, Brock Bowers at the 103. I think both of those we're going to see. That happened in real life. It's going to play out. Tom Smith also says, how far do you guys think Breece Hall falls in redraft next year? Breece Hall is a guy that plays on a team that I have no idea what to expect from them next year. They obviously have to make adjustments to that offensive line. I don't know what's going to happen with Rodgers, which means I don't know what's going to happen with Adams. That Garrett Wilson, obviously people were talking about him potentially being traded this year, which is wild. And then you have Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen in that backfield as well. So Breece Hall's not a first round pick. I'd still probably think we're going to see him in the second round though.
Like around that wrap, maybe even 2, 12, 13, 14.
Yes, I can see that as well. We got Tom Smith, Justin Jefferson, 4th overall. Nico Collins, top 6 next year. That's another interesting one because you assume Stephon Diggs is probably not going to be in Houston. And Tank Dell is probably going to miss the majority of the season with the bad injury he had, this past weekend too. So, I think that Nico Collins, that's a good call there as well.
Where are you on like the quarterback? Where to draft it early? I mean, I know obviously Josh Allen Jalen Hurts. I mean, are you up there, or you kind of go middle of the road? What's your philosophy?
Yeah, normally I wait on quarterback quite a bit. I usually, once there's 10 or 11 off the board, I'll hit quarterback bang bang in the 9th and 10th round, and there's my 2 that I'm rolling with.
Yeah.
I have noticed, and this year I know Tom was talking about this in the chat. I was all in on, and not all in, but I was really heavy on Jaden Daniels this year because of what I thought he was going to do, and then his draft capital price was really attractive. So I grabbed him in a bunch of leagues. And as I was drafting later and later into the season, his ADP was going higher and higher, and then I kind of got off Daniels at that point. But typically, that is how I handle the quarterback position. However, if I am in a draft, and you kind of got to know, who you're drafting against and see how it's going. But if I'm seeing guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and these guys slipping to like the 4th or the 5th round, then I will I'll be the guy that takes the first quarterback because that's just, I used to think that Joe Del Zanero, I always bring this up. Joe Del Zanero, a longtime FFPC player, always said that he'd love to take a quarterback early, but he's not a good enough drafter to, like, he needs the extra spot for run. And that's how I was. Like, I needed the extra running. I needed the extra. But one of the things I've learned over the last 6 or 7 years is that if you do have that elite quarterback, man, does that make it so much easier to win games week in and week out if you can utilize that. Now, you got to hit on your other positions. And it's never plan A for me, but it has been a plan I've utilized before for sure.
Yeah, because, if you go through, I bet you everybody could go through their first 8 rounds, and they probably swung and missed at 1, maybe 2. So why not grab that quarterback at that point? Yeah,
I'm totally on board with that. Quarterback is something, it's like anything. Andy Firestone, who's coming up on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour tonight in about an hour, he said this in one of his emails to me as we were getting ready for that show, and he said, I've played fantasy football. I should bring it up right now. It's he said he's been playing every year since Curtis Martin was a rookie. That was his first ever draft pick.
Yes,
Curtis Martin. He said this game is one we relearn every year, and boy, is that not appropriate and true. I mean, we're always relearning it. We're always adjusting it, and then we always got to. We kind of get not only got to. We have to get our player analysis correct. But we got to get our draft execution right too.
Yep.
And if you can get those right consistently, man, you are way ahead of the curve. You are a fantasy Hall of Famer if you can do that year in and year out, because those are 2 huge pillars of being successful.
The other thing I hit on this year, I took Kenneth Walker in the 4th round, and I grabbed Charbonnet in the 11th. And if you put Walker's missed about 5-6 games. If you put their numbers together, it's probably a top 10 running back.
Yeah.
Charbonnet's had some big weeks.
If only we could combine those 2 players.
Yes.
Into it. Now, I don't think that number one, I don't think that's morally ethical to combine 2. Number 2, I think the CBA would probably have a problem with that as well.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't know how we do it for fantasy, but yes, if we could ever get a Kenneth Charbonnet III, he would be the 101 pick in every draft next year for sure.
Yeah.
Let's do this. One final question here for you, Rob. Yep. Sleepers is really a difficult subject to talk about this late in the year.
Yeah.
Because is anybody sleeping anymore? So it's difficult to find those. But is there a player that you think a lot of people are going to be benching in championship week that you think is a mistake, that they actually should have them in your starting lineup? And then a guy that a lot of people are probably going to start, but they're probably going to be disappointed with the result.
I'm going to stay with, just because he's on my team, I'm going to go with Marvin Harrison to have a big week that some people might have given up on, And again, I'm going to go by. Now, I got to refresh your memory. You asked me the same question 2 years ago, and I told you to bench Jonathan Taylor, and he went for like 260 and 4 touchdowns. So I'm not a good guy to listen to.
Right.
But I think I'm going to go with that. They're out of it. Let's force it to Harrison, see what we're dealing with, Mm-hmm. But somebody like that might bust it this week. That's a tough question. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. So
I don't. It's tough because it's like it could be anybody, quite frankly.
Yeah,
it could be Kyron Williams. It could be Justin Jefferson. It could be George Kittle, somebody like it could be anybody. But that's why we love this. Joe Bryant from Football Guys, I think, always says this, like, when you're dealing with a sport that has a funny shaped ball that takes weird bounces, crazy stuff happens. Like crazy it just happened. And somebody's going to win $1 million this week. Two people are going to win $1 million this week.
Yep.
And it will be because of at least one crazy thing happening, because that's what it takes.
And it's sad when it ends, but like you said, to start your promo, do the playoff thing. We do it $200, try and win $500,000, right. Because it's sad when your team's done, because you become attached to these players,
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing too, when you're only drafting one main event team a year. I mean, these guys, it's difficult to say goodbye to that team that you've dealt with and babied over the course of 4 months, and now all of a sudden it's not a part of your life.
Well, especially, I always say, like, if you don't make the playoffs, that's a quick 12 weeks.
Right.
At least you get 13, 14, you get 5 extra weeks. So it's right. That's the importance of making the playoffs.
Which is always fantastic, and it's why we have that. Dave Gerzak, co-founder of the FFPC, always says that the world famous playoff challenge that the FFPC does, it's the equivalent of when you're playing poker with your buddies on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, and a couple of people at like 11 o'clock, 11:30, like, all right, I got to go home. And then you do the showdown. So it's like whatever you've been playing for all night, everybody just shoves it right in the middle for like one final hand. And that's kind of what that is as well. Well, listen, man, this was so much fun. I always enjoy our conversations.
Love it.
I want to wish you best of luck. I know you're probably out of the running for the $1 million, but that's not to say that you can't move way up the board and get some serious.
I'm trying like top 100, top 200, It's just, exactly. I told everyone too, your first goal is to win your league. This is just gravy. So yeah.
Right. Exactly.
But no, I love having it on. Appreciate everything you do. You're awesome.
Well, thank you, Rob, so much. We'll do this again real soon. Best of luck to you in Week 17, and may the ball bounce your way as we conclude the fantasy portion of the season. And good luck in the playoff challenge as well, my friend. Thank you so much.
Right. Happy holidays and Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year to you, Rob, too. That is Rob Linkowski, ladies and gentlemen, hopping aboard and chiming in on the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown tonight. I want to thank him for coming on. Great stuff from him. I want to also invite you to play that world-famous FFPC playoff challenge that's going on right now at myffpc.com. It is super simple. You are registering for either the $200 entry or the $35 entry. You can win $500,000 or $100,000 respectively, depending upon which one you join. There's no draft. There's no salary cap in there. You just choose the 12 players you want, one player per NFL team, and you don't have to mess with it every week. You just leave it in there. Double points for the Super Bowl for any players that you have left there. And you can register now at myffpc.com. Remember, the playoffs start early this year. They start at 1 o'clock on Saturday, not 4:30. So make sure you have all your teams, all your ducks in a row, because we can't sell any teams after 1 o'clock on Saturday, January 11th. Also, the FFPC Weekly Challenge going on right now at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Same format there. You can play with kickers and defenses, or you can play without them. One player per team. Win up to $2,500 this weekend. Enter for as little as $35 at myffpc.com. Hey, this was so much fun doing the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown on Friday this week. Let's do it on Friday again next week. This show returns live at 8 p.m. Eastern time next Friday. It'll be the first show of 2025 as we head into Week 18. And in case you are wondering, we are doing the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern time. So about an hour from now, Andy Firestone will guest co-host with me. Andy was the 6th place finisher in the FantasyPros Championship regular season this year. He's going to tell us about his team and how he's plotting to win $1 million this year in the FantasyPros Championship. We will be back with the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour next Friday at 10 p.m. And in case you missed the Better Sports Network's airing of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show last night, Thursday, we had Ryan Goodman from Rotoballer and I taking you into the final Thursday night football game of the season. You can rewatch that on any of the FFPC or Better Sports Network socials, including the Better Sports Network website at betternetwork.com. And next Thursday, we will do it again from 7 until 9 p.m. on Thursday. Bob Harris from Football Guys will co-host with me as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. For Rob Linkowski, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Good luck in Championship Week.
Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.